The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside Park as Officer Marcus Thompson adjusted his radio and scanned the growing crowd. Something felt wrong. The peaceful community rally that had been advertised as a celebration of local unity was drawing more people than expected. And, among the sea of faces, he spotted what looked like trouble brewing near the main stage. A tall black man in an expensive navy suit stood at the edge of the crowd, speaking quietly into his phone. His posture was confident, almost commanding, and that immediately set Thompson's instincts on high alert. "Suspicious activity," he muttered into his radio, never taking his eyes off the man. "Well-dressed individual, possibly coordinating something. Moving to investigate." The response crackled back through static. "Copy that. Thompson, keep us posted." Thompson pushed through the crowd, his hand instinctively resting on his belt. The man was still on his phone, gesturing subtly toward the stage where Mayor Patricia Williams was preparing for her opening remarks. Red flags went up in Thompson's mind. This had all the hallmarks of someone planning disruption, maybe even violence. The officer had been working this beat for 12 years, and he prided himself on being able to spot troublemakers from a mile away. The expensive suit didn't fool him. Some of the worst agitators came dressed to blend in, to look respectable, while they planted seeds of chaos. This guy fit the profile, perfectly confident, well-positioned, clearly communicating with others. As Thompson approached, he could hear fragments of the man's phone conversation. "Yes, I understand the concerns about security. No, we need to proceed as planned. The community deserves to hear this message." That sealed it. Thompson stepped directly into the man's line of sight and held up his hand. "Excuse me, sir. I need you to end that call and step over here." The man looked up, mild surprise crossing his features. He was younger than Thompson had initially thought. Maybe mid-40s, with intelligent eyes and the kind of composed demeanor that came from years of public speaking. But Thompson had seen plenty of smooth talkers before. "I'll call you back," the man said calmly into his phone, then slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Is there a problem, officer?" "That's what I'm trying to determine," Thompson replied, his voice carrying the authority he'd cultivated over years of crowd control. "You've been standing here for several minutes, making phone calls, positioning yourself strategically. I need to see some identification." The man's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained patient. "Strategically, I was simply finding a good spot to listen to the speeches. As for identification, may I ask what specific law I'm suspected of breaking?" Thompson felt his jaw tighten. The polite, educated tone only confirmed his suspicions. These were exactly the kind of tactics agitators used: legal language, calm demeanor, attempts to make the officer look unreasonable. "Sir, this is a public safety matter. We've had intelligence about potential disruptions at today's event. Your behavior fits the profile of someone planning to incite unrest." Around them, other rally attendees were beginning to notice the confrontation. A small circle of onlookers formed, some pulling out their phones to record. Thompson was aware of the attention, but refused to be deterred, if anything. Having witnesses would prove he was doing his job properly. "I assure you, officer," the man said, his voice remaining steady despite the growing crowd, "I'm here for the same reason as everyone else: to support our community and listen to what our leaders have to say." "Uh-huh," Thompson replied, unconvinced. "And those phone calls, who were you coordinating with?" The man hesitated for just a moment, and Thompson pounced on it. "See, you can't give me a straight answer because you're up to something. Now, I'm going to ask you one more time: identification. Now." By now, the confrontation had drawn a crowd of nearly 50 people. Mayor Williams, still preparing for her speech on the stage 30 yards away. noticed the commotion, and frowned. The rally was supposed to be about bringing the community together, healing recent tensions between residents and law enforcement. This was exactly the kind of incident they were trying to avoid. "Officer Thompson," a voice called from the crowd. It was Mrs. Jennifer Harrison, a longtime community activist, whom Thompson recognized. "What seems to be the problem here?" "No problem, ma'am," Thompson called back, not taking his eyes off his target. "Just routine security screening. Nothing for you to worry about." But Mrs. Harrison wasn't backing down. She stepped closer, her voice carrying across the crowd. "This doesn't look routine to me. This gentleman hasn't done anything wrong that I can see." Thompson felt the situation slipping away from him. The crowd was getting restless. Some people were filming, and now community leaders were questioning his judgment. He needed to regain control quickly. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but this is police business," he said firmly. "I'm going to need everyone to step back and let me do my job." Then, he turned back to the man in the navy suit, his voice growing harder. "You want to do this the easy way or the hard way? Because I can arrest you for obstruction if you keep refusing to cooperate." The man's composure remained unshaken, which only frustrated Thompson more. "Officer, I'm not obstructing anything. I've been nothing but cooperative. But I do have a right to know why you're singling me out from among all these other law-abiding citizens." "Because," Thompson said, his voice rising enough that the entire crowd could hear, "you fit the description of someone planning to disrupt this event. Your behavior, your positioning, your phone calls, it all adds up to trouble. And I'm not going to let you ruin this day for everyone else." A murmur went through the crowd. Some people nodded in support of the officer's vigilance, but others looked uncomfortable with the accusation. The man himself simply stood there, hands visible, posture relaxed, waiting to see what would happen next. "Officer Thompson," Mrs. Harrison said again, her voice carrying a warning note. "I think you might want to reconsider this approach." "Ma'am, with all due respect, I know how to do my job," Thompson shot back. "I've been protecting this community for 12 years, and I can spot a troublemaker when I see one." That's when the man finally spoke up, his voice cutting through the tension with unexpected authority. "Officer, what exactly do you see when you look at me?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Thompson felt every eye in the crowd on him, waiting for his answer. "I see someone who doesn't belong here," he said finally. "Someone who's dressed too well, talking too smooth, and acting like he owns the place." The words had barely left his mouth when he realized how they sounded. But it was too late to take them back. And besides, he told himself, he was just being honest about his professional assessment. The man nodded slowly, as if Thompson had confirmed something he'd suspected all along. "I see. And in your professional opinion, what should someone like me be doing instead of attending a community rally?" Thompson felt trapped by his own words, but pressed forward. "Look, I don't have time for philosophical debates. You're either going to show me ID and explain what you're doing here, or I'm going to assume you're up to no good and act accordingly." The tension in the crowd was palpable now. Phones were recording from multiple angles, and the murmur of conversation had died down to an uncomfortable silence. Even Mayor Williams had stopped her preparations and was walking toward the confrontation, flanked by 2 aides. "Officer Thompson," the man said quietly, "I want you to think very carefully about what you're doing right now, because once this goes too far, there's no taking it back." Thompson interpreted this as a threat. "Are you threatening a police officer?" he demanded, his hand moving toward his handcuffs. "Because that's a felony, and I will arrest you right here, right now." "I'm not threatening anyone," the man replied, his voice still calm, but carrying an undertone of steel. I'm simply trying to help you understand that actions have consequences, and assumptions can be dangerous. That was it. Thompson had heard enough coded language and veiled warnings. Turn around and put your hands behind your back, he ordered, pulling out his handcuffs. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and threatening a police officer. The crowd erupted. Some people shouted in protest. Others called for calm. And the constant clicking of phone cameras created a staccato soundtrack to the chaos. Mayor Williams quickened her pace, clearly trying to reach the scene before things got completely out of hand. But the man in the navy suit didn't turn around. Instead, he stood perfectly still, his hands visible at his sides, and looked directly into Thompson's eyes. Officer, I'm going to reach into my jacket pocket for my identification. I'm telling you this in advance, so there's no misunderstanding about my intentions. Thompson's training kicked in. A suspect reaching into their jacket could be going for a weapon. Don't move, he shouted, his voice carrying across the entire park. Keep your hands where I can see them. The crowd gasped, and several people screamed. The situation had escalated from a simple ID check to what looked like a potential shooting in the space of 30 seconds. Cell phone cameras captured every moment, broadcasting the confrontation live to social media feeds across the city. Officer Thompson. Mayor Williams' voice cut through the chaos as she finally reached the edge of the crowd. What is going on here? But Thompson was focused entirely on the man in front of him, who still hadn't moved. Ma'am, please stay back. This individual is refusing to comply with lawful orders and may be armed. Armed? Mrs. Harrison called out in disbelief. He was just standing here talking on the phone. The man himself remained perfectly still, but spoke in a voice that somehow carried across the entire crowd without him raising it. Officer Thompson, my name is David Mitchell. I am not armed. I am not a threat. And I have done nothing wrong. My identification is in my left inside jacket pocket. With your permission, I would like to show it to you. The formal, measured way he spoke cut through Thompson's adrenaline-fueled state, just enough to make him pause. Something about the man's demeanor was different now. Not submissive. Exactly. But official. David Mitchell. Mayor Williams' voice came from behind Thompson, and he could hear her pushing through the crowd. Did he say David Mitchell? Thompson glanced back quickly, seeing genuine alarm on the mayor's face. You know this individual, ma'am. Before Mayor Williams could answer, another voice cut through the crowd, a young woman in a professional blazer who was pushing through the onlookers with urgent determination. Governor, she called out, slightly out of breath. Governor Mitchell, I'm sorry I'm late, sir. Traffic was terrible and... She stopped mid-sentence as she took in the scene, the police officer with his hand on his weapon, the crowd of filming onlookers, and her boss standing perfectly still in the center of it all. The word governor hit the crowd like a physical force. The murmuring stopped entirely, replaced by a silence so complete that Thompson could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He turned slowly to look at the young woman who had just arrived. What did you just call him? The aide, because that's clearly what she was, looked between Thompson and the man in the navy suit with growing understanding and horror. This is Governor David Mitchell, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. The governor of this state. Thompson felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The confident man in the expensive suit. The one he'd profiled as a troublemaker. The one he'd been about to arrest. Was the governor. The governor he'd voted for. The governor whose policies he'd defended in countless conversations with his neighbors and colleagues. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every second of his shocked realization. Social media was exploding with hashtags and live streams. In less than an hour, this moment would be national news. "Governor Mitchell," Mayor Williams said, finally reaching the front of the crowd, her voice a mixture of mortification and damage control. "I am so deeply sorry. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." Governor Mitchell and Thompson could finally see it now. The familiar face he'd seen on television and in newspapers countless times nodded slightly, but kept his eyes on the officer. "Officer Thompson, I believe you wanted to see my identification." Thompson's throat felt like sandpaper. "Sir, Governor, I didn't. I mean, I was just—" "You were doing your job," the governor said quietly. "And somehow, that made it worse. You saw a black man in a nice suit and assumed he was trouble. You saw me talking on the phone and coordinating with my staff. And you decided I was planning to disrupt your community rally." The words hung in the air like an indictment. Around them, the crowd was processing what they'd just witnessed. Some people were openly crying. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief. The phones kept recording. "Governor, please," Thompson managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know. If I had known who you were—" "But that's exactly the point, isn't it?" Governor Mitchell replied, his voice still calm but carrying a weight that made everyone lean in to listen. "You treated me this way because you didn't know who I was, because you looked at me and made assumptions based on the color of my skin." Thompson wanted to protest, to explain that it wasn't about race, that he would have done the same thing to anyone acting suspiciously. But the words died in his throat, because somewhere, deep down, he knew it wasn't true. A white man in an expensive suit talking on his phone wouldn't have raised red flags. A white man positioning himself near the stage would have been seen as engaged, not threatening. "Officer Thompson," Governor Mitchell continued, and now Thompson could hear the authority in his voice, the same tone he used when addressing the state legislature or signing important bills. "What you did here today, in front of all these people and all these cameras, is exactly why we need to have serious conversations about policing in our communities." The aide who had arrived late was standing beside her boss now, her face pale, but her posture protective. Mayor Williams was clearly calculating the political damage this would cause for everyone involved. The crowd was a mixture of shock, anger, and something else, a kind of collective witnessing of a moment that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. "Governor," Thompson said, his voice cracking slightly, "I sincerely apologize. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake." Governor Mitchell studied him for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer but no less powerful. "Officer Thompson, I accept your apology. But I want you to understand something. I'm fortunate enough to hold an office that protects me from the worst consequences of profiling like this. But what about the young black men in this community who don't have that protection? What about the fathers and sons and brothers who get stopped, harassed, and worse, simply for existing in public spaces?" The question landed like a physical blow. Thompson thought about his own interactions with young black men over the years, the stops he'd made, the assumptions he'd operated under. How many times had he been wrong? How many times had he let his unconscious biases drive his actions? I don't know," he admitted, the words feeling inadequate, even as he spoke them. "That's the first honest thing you've said since this started," Governor Mitchell replied, "and it's a beginning." Mayor Williams stepped forward, clearly trying to regain some control over the situation. "Governor Mitchell, on behalf of the city, I want to formally apologize for this incident. Officer Thompson's actions do not reflect our values or our commitment to equal treatment under the law." Patricia, the governor said, using the mayor's first name with the familiarity of long political acquaintance. I appreciate that, but I think this is actually an opportunity. He turned to address the crowd directly, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone used to speaking to large audiences. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened here today is unfortunate, but it's also real. This is the reality that many people in our community face every day. The assumption that they don't belong, that they're up to no good, that they need to prove their worth just to exist in public spaces. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Phone cameras continued to roll, but the frantic energy of the confrontation had been replaced by something more solemn, more reflective. Officer Thompson, the governor continued, turning back to face him directly, made a mistake. But his mistake is our community's opportunity to have a conversation we should have been having all along. Thompson felt tears stinging his eyes. The weight of what he'd done, the implications of his actions, were finally hitting him with full force. Governor, what can I do? How can I make this right? Governor Mitchell considered the question carefully. You can start by acknowledging that this wasn't just a mistake. It was a reflection of biases that we all carry. Whether we want to admit it or not, you can commit to examining those biases and working to overcome them. And you can help us use this moment to make our community better. The governor's aide stepped forward slightly, whispering something in his ear. He nodded and looked back at the crowd. I was actually planning to speak at today's rally anyway. Mayor Williams had invited me to address some of the community policing initiatives we've been working on at the state level. I suppose this gives us a very timely example to work with. A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd. The tension was finally beginning to break, replaced by something that felt more hopeful, more constructive. Mayor Williams seized the moment. Governor, if you're still willing to speak, I think the community would very much like to hear what you have to say. I'm willing, Governor Mitchell said. But first, I want to say something directly to Officer Thompson. Thompson straightened, preparing himself for whatever judgment was coming. Officer, I don't want you to lose your job over this. I don't want you to be destroyed by one moment of poor judgment. But I do want you to learn from it. I want you to carry this experience with you and let it make you a better police officer and a better member of this community. The grace in those words nearly buckled Thompson's knees. He had been prepared for anger, for demands for his termination, for public humiliation. Instead, he was being offered redemption. Thank you, Governor. He managed to say, I won't forget this. I promise you. I won't forget. Governor Mitchell nodded, then turned toward the stage where Mayor Williams had been preparing to speak an hour earlier. Now, shall we turn this rally into something positive? I think we have a lot to talk about. As the crowd began to move toward the stage, people were already sharing videos and photos on social media. But the narrative was shifting. What had started as a story about police overreach and racial profiling was becoming something more complex. A story about grace under pressure, about the power of leadership, and about the possibility of turning conflict into constructive conversation. Mrs. Harrison, the community activist who had first challenged Thompson's actions, found herself walking beside the officer as they followed the crowd toward the stage. You know, she said quietly, the governor could have destroyed you today, could have had your badge, could have made you a national symbol of everything wrong with policing. Thompson nodded, still processing everything that had happened. I know. I'm lucky he's a better person than I am. Not lucky, Mrs. Harrison corrected. Blessed. And now you have a responsibility to live up to that blessing. As Governor Mitchell took the makeshift stage, flanked by Mayor Williams and several community leaders. He looked out over the crowd that had grown to nearly 1,000 people. Word of the confrontation and its surprising resolution had spread quickly, drawing additional residents who wanted to witness this unexpected moment of community reckoning. "Friends and neighbors," he began, his voice carrying easily across the park. "I came here today to talk about policy initiatives and budget allocations. Instead, we've all experienced something much more immediate and personal, a reminder that behind all our policies and programs are real people with real experiences and real biases." The crowd was completely attentive, phones still recording, but the frantic energy replaced by something more respectful, more engaged. "What Officer Thompson did to me today happens to Black and brown people in our community every single day. The difference is that I have the protection of my office, the platform of my position, and the privilege of being recognized. Most people who experience this kind of profiling don't have those advantages." Thompson, standing near the back of the crowd, felt each word like an indictment and a challenge. Around him, other officers who had arrived as backup looked uncomfortable, but were listening intently. "But here's what I want us to take away from today," Governor Mitchell continued. "This isn't just about policing. This is about all of us, and the assumptions we make about each other. Officer Thompson saw a Black man in a nice suit and assumed I was trouble. How many of us have made similar assumptions in our daily lives?" The question hung in the air, forcing uncomfortable self-reflection throughout the crowd. The good news is that assumptions can be changed. Biases can be recognized and overcome. Communities can heal and grow stronger. But it requires all of us to be honest about our own shortcomings and committed to doing better. Mayor Williams stepped forward to the microphone. "Governor Mitchell, what specific steps can our community take to address these issues?" "I'm glad you asked, Patricia," he replied. "First, we need to expand our community policing programs. Officers need to spend more time getting to know the neighborhoods they serve, not as enforcement agents, but as community members. They need to see the people they're protecting as individuals, not as threats." He looked directly at Thompson as he continued. "Second, we need mandatory bias training that goes beyond checking boxes. We need real, honest conversations about how unconscious prejudices affect our actions, whether we're police officers, teachers, employers, or neighbors. Third, and here his voice grew stronger, more passionate, we need accountability. Not just punishment when things go wrong, but proactive accountability. Officers supporting each other to do better. Community members speaking up when they see injustice. Leaders taking responsibility for creating systems that work for everyone. The crowd was responding now, with nods and scattered applause. The energy was shifting from the shocked silence of the confrontation to something more engaged and hopeful. "But most importantly," Governor Mitchell said, his voice rising to carry across the entire park, "we need to remember that we're all part of the same community. Officer Thompson and I may have started today as adversaries, but we're ending it as neighbors who have learned something important about each other and about ourselves." He gestured toward Thompson, who had been standing silently at the back of the crowd. "Officer, would you join me up here?" Thompson felt every eye in the crowd turn toward him. His first instinct was to refuse, to slip away and hope this entire incident would somehow be forgotten. But he knew that wasn't an option. Not after what the governor had offered him, not punishment, but redemption. He made his way through the crowd, each step feeling like a walk of shame and a journey toward salvation at the same time. When he reached the stage, Governor Mitchell extended his hand. "Officer Thompson," the governor said, his voice carrying across the park, "I want you to tell this community What you learned today. Thompson took the microphone with trembling hands. He looked out over the crowd, hundreds of faces, many of them filming, all of them waiting to hear what he would say. For a moment, he was paralyzed by the weight of the moment. Then he found his voice. I learned that I've been a police officer for 12 years, and I thought I knew what I was doing. He began, his voice shaky but growing stronger. I thought I was protecting people, keeping the community safe. But today I realized that my assumptions, my biases, were making me part of the problem instead of part of the solution. The crowd was completely silent, listening to every word. I looked at Governor Mitchell and saw what I expected to see: a threat, a troublemaker, someone who didn't belong. I didn't see a distinguished public servant, a leader, a fellow human being who deserved respect. I saw my own prejudices, and I acted on them. His voice was growing steadier now, the words coming more easily. That's not who I want to be. That's not the kind of police officer this community deserves. And I promise you, all of you, that I'm going to do the work to become better. Not just because I got caught. Not just because there were cameras, but because it's right. When he finished, the silence stretched for several long seconds. Then, slowly, applause began. Not thunderous, not universal, but real. People were clapping for his honesty, for his willingness to acknowledge his mistakes, for his commitment to change. Governor Mitchell took the microphone back. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what accountability looks like. Not perfect, not easy, but honest and committed to growth. The rest of the rally took on a different character than anyone had planned. Instead of the usual political speeches and community announcements, it became a town hall. People stepped forward to share their own experiences with profiling, with bias, with the complicated relationships between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Mrs. Harrison spoke about being followed in stores by security guards who assumed she was shoplifting. A young Latino man talked about getting pulled over repeatedly in his own neighborhood until officers finally recognized him as a resident. An elderly white woman admitted that she had crossed the street to avoid groups of young black men and said she was ashamed of her fear. Each story added layers to the conversation, creating a picture of a community grappling with difficult truths but committed to facing them together. As the formal program wound down, Governor Mitchell made one final announcement. I want to invite Officer Thompson and Mayor Williams to work with my office on developing a new community policing initiative. We'll use what happened here today as a starting point for real reform, real training, and real accountability. He looked directly at Thompson. Officer, I want you to help us design programs that will prevent other officers from making the same mistakes you made. Your experience today, painful as it was, can become a teaching tool that helps build bridges instead of burning them. Thompson nodded, still overwhelmed by the grace he was being shown. I'd be honored, Governor, truly honored. As people began to disperse, the conversations continued in small groups throughout the park. Children who had witnessed the day's events were asking their parents questions about fairness and respect, and why people sometimes treated each other badly. Teenagers were debating the role of social media in holding people accountable. Adults were exchanging contact information and making plans to continue the dialogue. Thompson found himself surrounded by a small group of community members, some supportive, others challenging, all engaged. Mrs. Harrison approached him as the crowd thinned. Officer Thompson, she said, I want you to know that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. We'll be watching to see if your actions match your words. I understand, he replied, and I hope you'll hold me accountable. I hope everyone will. As the sun began to set over Riverside Park, Governor Mitchell was packing up with his aide, preparing to leave for his next appointment. The day had certainly not gone as planned. But in many ways, it had been more important than any speech he could have given. Mayor Williams approached him one final time. "Governor, I cannot thank you enough for how you handled this situation. You could have, well, it could have gone very differently." "Patricia," he replied, "leadership isn't about having power over people. It's about using whatever power you have to lift people up, to create opportunities for growth and healing. Today was a perfect example of why that matters." Thompson was walking toward his patrol car when the governor called his name. He turned, uncertain what else might be coming. "Officer," Governor Mitchell said, walking over to him, "I want you to have my direct number, not for special treatment, not for favors, but because I think we can help each other become better at serving this community." He handed Thompson a business card with his personal contact information written on the back. "Call me in a week. Let's talk about how we move forward from here." Thompson took the card with hands that were still slightly shaking. "Governor, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll do the work," Governor Mitchell replied. "Say you'll help us make sure this kind of thing becomes a teaching moment instead of just another tragedy." "I will," Thompson promised. "I absolutely will." As both men walked away from Riverside Park that evening, they carried with them the weight and possibility of the day's events. The videos were already viral. The story was being picked up by national news outlets, and commentators were debating the implications of what had happened. But for the people who had been there, who had witnessed the confrontation and the grace that followed, the story was about something more fundamental than politics or policies. It was about the power of human dignity, the possibility of redemption, and the strength that comes from facing difficult truths together. In the weeks that followed, Riverside Park would become a symbol of something new in the community. The weekly rally continued, but it evolved into something more like a town hall, a place where people could come together to discuss difficult issues with honesty and respect. Officer Thompson became a regular attendee, not as security, but as a community member committed to learning and growing. The community policing initiative that grew out of that day would eventually become a model for other cities, with Thompson serving as a key trainer and advocate. His story, the story of a man who confronted his own biases and chose to do better, became a powerful tool for change. And Governor Mitchell continued to carry the memory of that morning with him, a reminder that leadership is not about being above the community you serve, but about being part of it, vulnerable to its judgments, and committed to its growth. The rally that was supposed to be about unity had become something even more valuable, a genuine moment of reckoning that brought people together, not in spite of their differences, but because they were finally honest about them. In a world often divided by fear and misunderstanding, Riverside Park had become a place where dignity met power, where grace overcame prejudice, and where a community chose to heal rather than to fracture. And sometimes, in the quiet moments of the early morning when Officer Thompson drove through the neighborhoods he now served differently, or when Governor Mitchell reviewed policy proposals with new eyes, informed by lived experience, they both remembered that difficult, transformative day when everything changed. They remembered that redemption is possible, that communities can heal, and that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is not anger or punishment, but the patient, persistent work of building something better together. The story of that day at Riverside Park became more than just a news item or a social media moment. It became a testament to the possibility that exists when people choose grace over grievance, growth over gotcha moments, and community over division. It proved that even in the darkest moments of misunderstanding and prejudice, there is always the possibility of light if people are brave enough to face the truth, and committed enough to do the work of change. And in the end, that may be the most important lesson of all, that dignity and power, when they meet with grace and humility, can transform not just individuals, but entire communities, creating ripples of positive change that extend far beyond any single moment, any single park, or any single confrontation. They can create hope,